Hello, everybody, and welcome to the London Mountain Podcast. My name's Greg Hackett, and in this series of interviews, I'm going to be talking to filmmakers who enter their films for our festival, and I'm also going to be talking to community hosts, who are the wonderful people who share those films in their communities. If you think you could be either a filmmaker or a community host, then this is the podcast for you. Enjoy. Hi, welcome back to the London Mountain Podcast. In this episode, I am talking to Dom Bush, whose business Land and Sky Media is based up in Kendal, Cumbria. How are you doing, Dom?
Good, thank you. Yeah, nice to be here.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us. Now, I was looking at your website. Obviously, I like to do my research, and you do work with quite a lot of brands. But I noticed on there, like outdoor brands, but I noticed on there's also you've got quite a lot of other organisations that don't fit that mould necessarily, like the National Trust or media organisations like the Guardian. And I think you're the first person I've really spoken to who has those kinds of clients. What is it about Land and Sky Media that attracts that sort of business?
Well, there's a couple of things, I guess. I started out. I have a love of the outdoors, and I've been a rock climber for kind of 30 years. Mountain biker, skier, so I've got those connections. But I never started out to be an adventure filmmaker. I made it quite clear to myself and to other people that I was a documentary maker, and that sometimes moved into kind of remote location and mountain film stuff. But I've never, it was very in vogue, I think, at a certain time to be an adventure filmmaker. And I don't like following trends, I guess, but also I just felt like there's so much rich storytelling not in the adventure film world. It's like, why would I shut myself off to that? I want to be a documentary maker. So that means that I've been very deliberate in not kind of pigeonholing myself into that particular area. So I would say my specialism kind of spans remote location and adventure film, but also environmental documentary and social documentary. So that's why I've ended up working with The Guardian, and I work with the National Trust. And, it's very, very hard to survive just being an adventure filmmaker. So it seems nonsensical to me that I would kind of pigeonhole myself into that and not keep myself open to other sources of funding and avenues for storytelling and things like that. So, yeah, I've very deliberately pushed into other areas.
Okay. And do you, I mean, using one film as an example, you've made a film called Naught But a Fleeting Thing, which you kindly allowed us to share in the past, which is a film about rural life on a farm in Cumbria. And I get the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that you come from that kind of background. Is that correct? So how important do you think it is that people making films about subjects like that, about the environment, the outdoors, the rural areas, how important is it that there is that authenticity behind it, that that person comes from that kind of background as well? Does it matter?
Yes, it does matter. I think in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's your opinion we're asking.
Yeah. I'm the guy on the podcast. That's fine. Yeah. So it's interesting because in my mind, there comes a distinction between like authentic storytelling and content. There's this big push on creating content for brands and things like that and organizations, and somebody can parachute into a community or a place and create content really easily. But it takes time, understanding, and instinct to really create storytelling in a place. And I think authentic storytelling. And I think ethically, there's problems when people parachute into communities that they don't really fully understand, and try and tell kind of bite-sized little stories or create content. And so, yeah, for me personally, with Not But a Fleeting Thing, so I'm not a farmer. I didn't grow up as a farmer, but I did grow up on a kind of a small holding, so surrounded by animals. And I grew up within a farming community, so everybody around me pretty much was a farmer. All the kids that I went to school with were farmers. All of my best mates in primary school were farmers. I worked on farms. I went hay timing when, in the summer, and, so I felt like I understood that community in a way that a lot of people, other people might not. But also I was accepted in that, that community in particular, farmers, they can be quite defensive. It can be quite closed for very good reasons, because they get bashed from all different angles. Sometimes reasonably, sometimes, irrationally, unfairly. So I felt like, as somebody who would kind of come from the inside, but had a little bit of outside perspective, I could authentically tell that story, and I was welcomed in. I could walk into a farm. I could walk onto a farm and not be kind of, really, non-threatening, I guess. So, yeah, back to your question. Do I think it's important? I think it can be done if you're not from that community, but ethics need to be absolutely central to what you're doing. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of filmmakers, storytellers, photographers, whatever, that quite often isn't. It's the money or the content or the channel that they're working with that is central to what they're doing. So I think you can do it ethically and sensitively, but it's best from somebody who has come from that community or fully understands it.
This might be a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I've got an editing suite. Do you think, is it the same or is it similar to the Hollywood argument around casting and around whether or not people of a particular identity should be played by people who have that authentic identity in real life, like people of color or people, you know what I'm saying? Should is it like that? Is it certain films should only really be made by people who've actually lived that experience?
No, I don't think it should be exclusive, but I do think there's a real misunderstanding of ethics in documentary and how we represent people, or maybe not a misunderstanding, maybe a naivety. And as I say, if somebody isn't from that community, but they're going to do it really ethically, and they're going to perhaps have somebody from that community on their team, or an advisor, or somebody who understands, who's kind of helping to steer it, then yeah. But it has to have that grounding in kind of ethical consideration, because storytelling in any form can be exploitative, and as soon as you bring in money, brands, organizations, people's stories then become a kind of commodity or a tool, and I think you need an ethical grounding in what you're doing so that people don't get used.
Yeah, it's about exploitation, that, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Either by the creative who's just like committed to like, this is what I want to do. I'm a creative. I'm going to make stuff. And I think some people can be pulled along by the ride. And I'll put myself into this bracket. I've done that. I know I have. You know, in the past, I've followed stories, and I've maybe not been quite as ethically aware of what that might be like for the person who's in it, because I'm just on my little, you know, thing. And so, yes, I do think it can be done, but it needs care, consideration, ethical thought, and possibly somebody from that community within the filmmaking team.
So there are lots of people out there, young people, I suppose I'm thinking about, who are looking to get into making films and don't necessarily have access to the funding to buy themselves a nice course somewhere or something. But they're looking to make films about, you know, their lived experiences and the things that matter to them. And I know you've done some teaching, and I also know you've had some experience perhaps of talking to younger filmmakers who are on this journey. What can they do? What? Because it's a tough old industry, this, isn't it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to cut a living in it. The more I talk to filmmakers, the more that's drummed home. How hard is it to break into if you've got little to start with, and what can you do?
Okay. So it 40 years ago, you needed 40 grand to buy a camera. And you needed to pay somebody who could even use that camera to, you know, the costs were just ridiculous to make a film, and particularly if you're shooting on film, or, you know, it eliminates like 99.9% of the population from doing that thing. That has changed. Filmmaking has been democratized. Um, because of equipment changing and cameras being much more readily available and things. So in that sense, it is more accessible. So
So technology is no longer a barrier. The cost of technology.
I mean, people say this all the time. You can make a film on a phone. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. So yeah, in that sense, technology is far less of a barrier than it ever was, which is great. The industry itself is quite a brutal place, and it can certainly work. You know, you've spoken to me and you've spoken to other filmmakers. We are making a living. Right. Okay. So maybe the best way for me to explain this, and these are the kind of the best things that I can tell any young filmmaker starting out. And as I say, I was a film teacher for 7 years. I've kind of been a mentor to young filmmakers. A portfolio is the most valuable thing you can have. Sack off the expensive camera. That nobody cares about that when they come to you. If you can show people that you have work that has value and you can tell a story, that means so much more than the camera that you're using. They won't care what camera you're using. So if you want to do this, build a portfolio. That's your most valuable asset. Scrimp and save and get yourself a decent camera, but that's much lower down the scale. And the golden thing that I always tell people, and this is something that I was told right at the beginning of my career by an adventure film maker who was top of his game and gave me the first kind of professional gigs that I did. He said, "This is going to take you a long time. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You could look at it being 15 years. And it's now probably, I'm like 13 years in of running a production company, and I'm supporting my family and 3 kids. it's still hard. But there's a million people on YouTube or Instagram or wherever that will tell you can do this in a year. 6 figures in a year, just buy my course or whatever. There's a lot of snake oil out there. If you want to be a professional creative, you've got to be committed. You've got to have a kind of bloody-minded quest, and you've got to accept that this is going to take you a long time. And you absolutely will get there. If you have those things, a portfolio, a bloody mind, and a half-decent camera, you'll get there, but don't expect it to happen quickly. And, and sadly, there are more barriers for young women. You don't see as many young women on film crews, and you have to see it to be it. And for in recent years, the industry has contracted, and a lot of people are struggling. High-end professionals are struggling to pay their mortgages and things like that, particularly in TV. It's got really, really difficult. And the people who get bumped in that situation are the people who have no backup. So working class creatives who've been pushing really hard for 5, 6, 7 years to get into the industry, but don't have a bank account with a load of funds in from wherever, or a house in London that they can rent out, or they're the people that get bumped off the bottom, and it becomes very, very difficult to get in. So, I think there are considerable barriers within it, and this is why we see this kind of I can't remember the term, positive discrimination with funding and things. Those funds absolutely need to go to working class young people, or working class women, or working class women from ethnically diverse backgrounds, because the barriers are much more significant to those people, and we can kind of skirt around that and assume that they're not really, and we're kind of, it's all reasonably fair, but the truth of it is, it just isn't. It's a lot harder for certain people. So, without getting too opinionated, the kind of, the kids of the London elite, who quite a lot of documentary filmmakers are, it's not that big a deal when the work dries up, or things get difficult, or they can kind of still get things made, and and good on them. And there's loads of amazing filmmakers that come from those backgrounds. They make absolutely valuable work. But there's a reason why these funds go to certain people, and I think that push is right. And I find myself out of all of that. I am now I've come from a background where there was little money. I'm in a reasonable position now. I'm obviously a white man, and I don't tick a lot of the boxes, So, but I'm well established, and like, other people should be given that opportunity. That was a very long-winded answer. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not.
No, you did answer the question. You absolutely did. And it takes me on to the next one, which is about pressures on the industry, because we talked about technology and how that has changed over the last, you said 40 years. It's quite a big time frame. We don't have to go back that far, but for people who make this, for people breaking through, what's the heads up, in terms of what trends do you see that are creating stress upon your line of work at the moment? Things that you're concerned about that will get worse and worse. It sounds really depressing. So this is taking a dark turn.
No, it's fine. I'll try and spin it in a slightly positive way somehow. So to start off with, I'm not a brilliant person to talk about trends, because they make my skin crawl a little bit, and I try and push against trends. I think there's some really, really solid fundamentals that we can stick by, and then there's like trends that blow through and veer us off course, you know, and they come and go, you know, and sometimes I'm like, oh God, I should have my finger on the pulse and work out what the trends are and things like that. But brilliant storytelling is brilliant storytelling. And you might change the length of the film and stuff like that, but the fundamentals are all the same. Like, learn to tell a story well. And this is, I think, fair enough slightly, but this is, I think, where quite a lot of adventure filmmakers get spun off, because adventure filmmaking is kind of one of those trends to some extent. Sorry, I know you've got an adventure film festival, but it.
We veer off every now and again, don't we?
Yeah. The best adventure films in the world that have ever been made are just brilliant documentaries. They just happen to have some mountains and stuff in them. Yeah. Learn to make brilliant documentaries. Don't get drowned in this like adventure filmy thing. You know, that's not the discipline that you should be concentrating on. Absolutely brilliant storytelling means a lot in any sort of context that you put it in. So that's what I focus on, being the best storyteller I can. I don't focus on lots of trends. I don't care too much about having a big following on social media and things like that, because ultimately I don't think it really makes the difference. So other things that so politics has a big part to play, because with certain governments, and I'm not going to go political, with certain governments, funding gets pulled, particularly for the arts, and that has happened. You know, so the funding that came down from the EU and these different organisations gets funneled in through the BFI or something into these little pots of money for filmmakers, and so our vote counts in that sense. We need to vote for the creative industries if we want those little pots of money to exist, because they will get pulled away, and they are getting pulled away. So yeah, politics plays a part in it, and AI is the one that everybody's talking about. If I'm completely honest, I do put my fingers in my ears when people say AI, because it does freak me out. And I don't know. I'm not the sort of person that's going to go and delve into AI and try and understand it all. There's AI that I use in my process, in my editing process, for cutting interviews and stuff. It's absolutely brilliant, so useful. So there's aspects of that can make our job way easier. I think photographers have a lot more to worry about. Filmmaking is such a complicated process with lots of different moving parts, some of which include going and standing in a field with a camera and talking to a human being. I think for the most part, filmmaking's fairly safe, at least for the time being. If you're purely an editor, I don't know, there's more risk there of AI coming and grabbing bits. But I think you do have to be. I guess I have the privilege of sticking my fingers in my ears a little bit, because I feel like I'm a little bit safer than other people. If you're just an editor or you're just a photographer, I think it's good to really understand what's going on with AI and try and pivot and change and shift.
Yeah. It certainly seems to be creeping into the sort of the editing process. In fact, there's even a bit involved in the making of this podcast, I can assure you. But it sounds like what you're saying, I think, if I'm reading you right, is that if you stick to the knitting, the storytelling, that's the thing that you think can help you weather any storm.
Yeah, because sorry, just one point on that. Storytelling has been fundamental to our being as humans from the very beginning. We've always done it, and we live in a world that is confusing and chaotic and intangible, and there's all sorts of things that we don't and can't understand. We use storytelling to create order within that chaos, and we always have, and that's never going to go away. So do that, be an expert at that, and there will always be a place for you within humanity.
I haven't actually delved into I haven't scraped beneath the surface with other filmmakers yet on this idea of how do you do that? You know, how do you actually go about telling a good story? I've got a feeling that you're going to tell me a lot of it's to do with possibly with truth and honesty and ethics, because we touched on that earlier, and that's certainly apparent in Red Needle, your last film, the one that we showed last year. I think it's a very honest and open film. Is that it? Is there anything else that you can? It's probably a 5-day course, storytelling. But can you put it into? Can you
Uh,
can you somehow explain what it is that makes a difference between an excellent story and an average story,
I mean,
or the telling of it? I mean,
yeah. I mean, a lot of stories are essentially the same. Like, go and watch Star Wars. People say this all the time. It's weird, but we're kind of using the same devices over and over again, because somehow in our human psyche and psychology, it works that way. And I guess maybe that, going out on a quest, coming up against some sort of adversity that's going to create some sort of change, fundamental change within that human, and then coming back a changed human with gifts, abundance, or whatever, a mammoth, or like somewhere in us that just really works. So, if you read books on storytelling, then they will explain all of these kind of really, really simple devices that you can use. But in its simplest form, storytelling needs to have a beginning where we meet and understand the people that are within it. It needs to have a middle where some sort of journey or transformation happens, and there has to be a transformation, either very much within the audience or very much within the character, or ideally both. And then there has to be an ending. We have to summarize and pin down what we've learned, so that when people go away from that story, they know why they watched it. So that's the most basic thing. And yeah, I could go much deeper, but I think if you want some really fundamentals, that's it. But just read a book on storytelling.
the arc. Well, I'm moving into the last sort of fifth of this chat. My last bullet point here that I wanted to cover, because I think I've spent about 20 minutes grilling you about the difficulties of your job, and I feel a bit guilty about it. But I noticed on your social media that you've been in North Wales just recently making a film, which I'm sure was a brilliant experience. So you okay to talk a bit about that and tell us what you've been up to?
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, I was approached by the Climbing Hangar, who own various climbing walls across the country quite a long time ago now. And they wanted to make a film about their Refugees Rock group. So they basically opened their doors to people seeking asylum, refugees, across their centres. So they wanted to create a space where people could learn to climb, use their body, meet friends, and create community. So, it's an amazing thing that they've done. So we set about making a documentary about Refugees Rock and funding it, and the funding process took forever. But we managed to get there, and yeah, we've focused on three particular characters: Dilan, who's come from Kyrgyzstan, Ben from Iran, and Mariam, who is from West Africa, Gambia. And we're telling their stories, and it's similar to lots of the films that I made. It's this process of creating nuance and filling in some of the greys in between, because we live in a society where the media will paint refugees as criminals and scroungers and things like that. So it's about our shared humanity. Basically, it's about understanding why people might leave their homeland and how impactful it might be for them to come to a new place where they don't know a soul, they don't know how anything works, they can't get around, they don't have a job, they don't have a connection to the landscape, and how something like Refugees Rock can start to just build those elements of, you know, fundamental human life that they need. And so we're planning to premiere it at KMF and get the guys from the Refugees Rock crew that have been involved, hopefully, to the festival, to come and do a talk and stuff. And there's been really careful and strong ethical conversations about how we represent people in this community. Asha is our producer, and she is a settled refugee, so she's got refugee status here, and she has been producing for the film. We're going to set up a kind of a bursary for her, so we're going to buy her some film equipment and things like that are going to help her get established, because she's done some filmmaking in Pakistan. Ahmed, another one of the refugees, has worked as a photographer for us on the film. So we're trying to integrate as many experiences and possibilities for the refugees within this filmmaking process, so that it's not extractive and exploitative at all. It's profoundly positive for the community. And some of the stuff we filmed is like some of the most powerful stuff I've ever filmed. It's like taken my breath away. So I think it will be a really good film.
I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to see it. This idea of, and it sounds like a brilliant project, but this idea of climbing walls as social hubs came up in another conversation I had with somebody who ran an event in a climbing wall. It's interesting, that, isn't it? That actually, you know, it's the climbing is a little bit in the background here, isn't it? It's actually providing an environment where people can do something, because, you know, there's there's few real places where you can do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like you're taking so am I right in thinking, I'm assuming here that because you're in North Wales that you weren't in a climbing centre, you're actually out on a rock somewhere.
Yeah. So
Did you get up there?
yeah, so we had this objective, and you know, it's the journey part of the film. These guys, quite a lot of them were interested in climbing outside. So, and also we wanted to support them potentially to create a connection to the earth here. They've been ripped away from their homeland, and this is their new home. So it's about kind of creating home, and so we wanted to go to North Wales where they could go climbing outside, understand how it all works, and do some multi-pitch climbing. And then we went up a big mountain, really beautiful mountain. Can't remember the name of it. That's really bad. But we've been supported by various organisations, and Plasty Brennan were really supportive, and a mountain guide called Alice Kerr, who, yeah, we went together up this mountain, and it was really profound, a really beautiful experience.
Well, that idea of connecting with the earth, you know, I can imagine that will make for powerful viewing. Wow. Well, yeah, I'm going to stop there because I can't really think of anything to say after that. I think I just want to see that film now. Look, Dalman, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting talk there, and lots of great tidbits and tips and advice, I think, for new film, and a few words of warning possibly for filmmakers who are coming through.
Yeah.
But thank you for your honesty and your time today. I really loved it. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks very much for having me on.
Hey everybody, and thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, if you want to be a community host, it is really, really easy to bring adventure to your hometown village, wherever it is you hang out, and raise money for your club, your charity, your adventurous cause. All the details are on our website. Check it out, and we'll see you in February. Thank you. Bye.